College Humanities Symposium. My name's Sheila Daz. I'm the coordinator of this year's symposium, and I would like to invite our dean, Kelly Purdy, to say a few words.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. How is everyone doing? You gave Sheila a nice applause. Yeah. All right, good afternoon. So it's really a great privilege to be able to give a few opening remarks to the first talk of this year's Humanities Symposium. So I was especially excited to see this year's theme of what is real, because it takes me back to my own days as a student and a course that I took that completely changed the course of my academic studies. It was a research methods course where students were asked to think about the claims and the headlines of things that were going on in the media, and so to kind of dig deeper and think about what was actually being portrayed. And I found it really fascinating to just learn how often the headlines were misleading, imagine that, and how important it was to ask questions and to think carefully about what I was reading. So deciding what to believe or determining what is real both use an absolutely essential skill for life. I'm sure you can guess what that is. Critical thinking. There are many things that change over time. So for example, technology in the classroom. I won't tell you what I used to use in the classroom when I first came to Vanier almost 20 years ago, but it was not this. It was, you never ever heard of overhead projectors? I used to even bring a floppy disk when we finally got a computer in the classroom. So things change over time. However, one of the things that has not changed over my almost 20 years at Vanier is the necessity for students to learn critical thinking. And I have no doubt that you're developing that in all of your courses at Vanier. However, your humanities courses play a key role. And this is why having a week such as the Humanities Symposium is so important. So I won't take up too much of your time because I want to get on to other things, but I just wanted to say it takes a lot of work, dedication to get events like this organized. So I'd sincerely like to thank this year's organizer, Sheila Daz, who you just saw previously, to thank her for all her efforts in putting this week together. It's a really great lineup and compelling set of talks and discussion panels. And so I just want to thank you very much, Sheila. I'll now call upon Ellie Yassine, who is a student in Communications, Media, and Studio Arts, as well as a student who's taking the Indigenous Studies Certificate to do a land acknowledgement.
Thank you. So my name is Yasmin Yassine, and Ali Yassine, I'm sorry. I bumped on my own name. So even though I'm an Indigenous, I'm doing an Indigenous Studies Certificate, I understand that as a non-Indigenous person, my next few words could seem a tad generic. However, they are extremely important, and they are the first step to take for a better future. So we acknowledge that the place in which we work and study is situated within the traditional unceded land of the Ganingahaga people, part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. There is also a strong historic presence of Anishinaabe people in what is now known as the Greater Montreal area. Cheocheage, or Montreal, has also long been and continues to be a gathering place for many First People from all directions. We honor and thank the traditional custodian of this land and strive to work for the success of future generations. That being said, let's make those words and thought part of our daily lives. Thank you.
Yay, now the first speaker. So I'm very happy to be the first one to introduce this wonderful first speaker. It's Jimena Marquez, who was born in Mexico City. She moved here in '98. That's when I finished my CEGEP. And to study at McGill. She did her master degree focusing closely with the Wixárika people from Tateyque. in Mexico, and then continue on her doctoral studies on Indigenous pedagogy, including a focus on Indigenous healing tradition and research methodologies. I was really excited to find a few articles about her work online. One that she did a lot of experiential learning, land-based, when she brought a bunch of students canoeing. Wouldn't that be fun? Canoeing, cooking outside, walking in the forest. That was an actual class. Let's make one at Vanier like this. Woohoo! So I'm very excited to introduce her now. It's the English Montreal School Board who have the privilege and luxury to have her as an employee, where she works at helping Indigenous students and raising awareness about Indigenous issue. So everyone, a warm welcome to Jimena Marquez.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be here. It's good to be back in CEGEP. I was also a CEGEP teacher for many years, not in such nice auditoriums as this, but okay. So the first theme of this symposium is going to kind of take us far out there, right? So I'm going to talk about the Wirrárica people. This was a little bit about myself because I did not know how much I was going to be introduced. So I started visiting the community of Tateyque in the 1990s when I was a teenager, right? I thought it was the coolest thing in the world to go up into the mountains, no cell phones. You would just kind of go up there for 2 weeks and to experience, right, this kind of remote indigenous communities and participating in Semana Santa, which is Easter, right? In Mexico, we have 2 weeks off, not 2 days, which makes much more sense to us. And this is what led me to do anthropology, right? Like what kind of a job gets you to go to these communities and participate in these sort of activities? And it was like, bingo, there's a job for that and you get paid for that. It's anthropology, right? So I went to study anthropology at Université de Montréal. And then after I did research with the people of Tateyque, I continued to be in contact with some of those communities through fundraising. They have a scholarship fund. So I've stayed in contact with those communities throughout my years, even working here. So those are pictures of me you can't see in the shade. This is the family I was staying with in Tateyque. Okay, so just, I'm not assuming you know anything about Mexico. So I'm gonna have to give you a little kind of short, fast quiz on Mexico. Mexico's got over 126 million people. That's, I guess, 4 times Canada. It's a lot, but it's a smaller country, right? So it's much denser. About 13% or 16 million people identify as indigenous. Now, Mexico doesn't have an Indian law. It doesn't have an Indian act. You don't have Indian status. It's not a card. It's not a legal status. So it's kind of much more fluid. How do you identify as indigenous? Usually it's through your community, right? Because a lot of people are mixed blood. It's called mestizo, right? That's kind of part of what being Mexican means, right? Is that you're part Spanish, part something else. So the people that really identify as indigenous have a much stronger hold of culture, language, practices. So you have about 68 indigenous languages in Mexico. So the Wirrárica people that I'm talking about are one of those people that have a specific language and a specific kind of home territory. And so there are about 30,000 in what is called the Sierra Madre and about 15,000 in urban areas. So this is what, I'm not assuming you know Mexican geography, right? So if we look at Mexico, that state in red is Jalisco. And the Wirrárica people are in this is kind of all mountain areas. So the cities that you have circled around, those are the major cities, right? Puerto Vallarta, anybody heard about Puerto Vallarta? On the Pacific coast, it's a big, I guess, a beach, very known. Mazatlan, so this is kind of the northwest. Guadalajara is the second biggest city in Mexico. It's got about 12 million people. Mexico City's got 20 million people, 23 maybe now. And so these are the cities, when we say that Wirrárica people go to the cities, so they go to these cities, but the home territory is that kind of that mountainous area. So if we were to compare to Canada, just so they get a sense of space, all the Inuit people in Nunavut, right? If you think of the Arctic, that's what they would represent. That's about the population, right? So if Canada has about 5% of Indigenous peoples, which is about 1,800,000, all Inuit people in Nunavut would be the equivalent of the Wirrárica people, right? So it's just that to get a sense of the space is just 10 times smaller, the space where they inhabit, right? So Mexico is very dense. There's a lot of density in these cities and these mountainous areas, right? Which is kind of very different from Canada's very expansive. And so people have had to kind of, I guess, not, you can't be that isolated, even when it's a remote area. When you look at the map, you can see how dense it is, right? Okay, so we are situated in time and space so that it's not too abstract. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the far out stuff, right? So this is a symposium on what is real, right? So how do we know what is real? What do we usually rely on? Can you give me a guess? Yeah? Our senses, right? So what I see, right? What I hear. What else? Is there something else that, yeah?
What people tell me is real.
Right. So there's also kind of that, what my mind is processing in sort of information, right? And we're the only living organism that is capable of kind of retelling information that is not available through the senses, right? We can tell stories, we can tell lies, we can invent stuff, right? So we can hear and imagine all sorts of realities, right? So you're right, conceptions of reality. We usually rely on our senses. And if people are telling us stories, we also want to know, like, when did that happen? How did that happen? What did you see, right? We still refer to those senses, right? If they're telling you a dream, at some point you're like, dude, that's a dream. Doesn't make sense what you're telling me, right? We'll have always kind of, we have weight, we have gravity, we have all these components that give us a sense of what is real. Okay, we still agree. Now, what happens when we have metaphysical conceptions of reality, right? And this is where we're going to start to leave the senses, right? So what if there is conceptions that there are some things real beyond what we can see and touch, right? So in a lot of cultures, not just indigenous cultures, there is a sense of what is beyond the mind, right? But that you can still have access through the mind, right? So you can have access through waking, dream, what sometimes are called trance states. So here we're not talking about heaven and hell and kind of this, what happens when you die. This is not about when you're dead, right? This is about the idea that there's a reality behind reality, so that the senses are somehow a reflection of something else, right? So there's Platonic philosophies. I mean, maybe in the West that is something that could be referred to if you have some of those classes. But in a lot of indigenous cultures, this is often called the supernatural or the spiritual realm, right? And the spiritual realm is seen as the realm of causation, right? So that's where the ultimate reason for the stuff that happens, right? So if you say, if this person got sick, okay, they got sick because of a virus. Okay, but why did they get sick specifically? Well, just because. Well, see, that's not a good answer, right? So within this kind of frame of mind, there are ultimate causes. Why are some people starving? Why can't... So for example, in hunting traditions, in hunting cultures, it's very random. How can you guarantee that there's a hunt? You can't, right? You go hunting and maybe you hunt and maybe you don't. So there were always all sorts of rituals also to appease what would be called kind of the spirit of the animals, right? So if you actually are able to contact that spirit of the animals, then the animals will let themselves be hunted. That sounds kind of far out, but that's why it's another kind of conception of what is the ultimate causation of these things, right? So are there ways to access this ultimate reality without dying, right? We're not talking about dying. yes, right? And this is where we go into kind of what are some of these indigenous approaches. So in a lot of cultures, and I'll say indigenous, but it doesn't just apply to North America, right? A lot of indigenous, you can go to Australia, you can go to places in Africa. There's practices, right, that people do to attain or to access those altered states of consciousness, right? Music is a big one, right? Drumming, rhythmic dancing, rhythmic chanting, like these very kind of hypnotic, self-hypnotic states that are supposed to bring you, right, to experience these alternate states of reality. Then there's intense fasting rituals. In the Plains Indians, those are called vision quests, but many traditions have fasting rituals where you deprive the senses, and so you kind of access this other reality. And then the one that I'm going to talk a little bit more about that refers to the Wirarika is eating substances, which are mind expanding, or there's other adjectives sometimes given to substances. So within the Wirarika worldview, so the people that I introduced you to, there's a central substance that is called peyote, right? So peyote is that which gives people access to the spiritual realm, to the realm of the spirits, the ancestors, the gods. I mean, that has a lot of specific names, which it's hard to translate, right? Because they don't use these words. Now, peyote as a mind-altering technique it became very popular. How many of you had heard about peyote before? Okay, so you see it's not that exotic because peyote is known probably since the 70s, right? So in the 70s, the hippie movement, psychedelic movement, the West stopped condemning substances, which it had done for hundreds of years, through very kind of violent means of putting people in jail and basically burning everything that was related to that. And they started to get interested in indigenous spirituality. And you had the hippies that were like, hey, we want to, expand our minds too. And they started experimenting with substances. But then when they turned to indigenous cultures, they realized that these cultures had very, very specific rituals. You can't just go like, I want a trip today. They're like, no, it's not the right day. This doesn't happen every day. There's a schedule, right? And hippies were like, what do you mean a schedule? We don't do this on a schedule. And then we just trip when we want to. It's like, no, you don't, right? So it's not because these substances are very powerful within Wirarika worldview, they're very, very restricted, right? So this, in the illustration, so all the illustrations that you see are yarn paintings. And so in this one, you see like the deer's head and you see like the peyote floating. And I'll show you more illustrations. Those are peyotes. So this is what a peyote looks like. So it's a mushroom that doesn't really, it has a very long root. So you barely see it. So that's about this big, and that's a big close-up. And this quote, without peyote, nothing would exist. Peyote is everything. There's a typo. I just realized that. I've seen this slide 10 times, and I just realized it. And this was a quote that an anthropologist who was working with the Wirarika people, in her article, she's going to the desert, and she's asking some people things, and then there's somebody that says, hey, you don't ever ask the right questions. You never ask us, what does peyote actually mean? And he says that right from the start. Without peyote, nothing would exist. And so her whole book is going like, what are you talking about? Like, that is the source of reality? It's a mushroom. It's a cactus, Like, it really kind of makes her think how her definition of reality is so radically different from these people who she thinks she knows, right? She's been kind of doing field work for years and thinks she understands their worldview very well. And she's still confronted with this idea that peyote is everything, right? How could this cactus be everything? How does it actually create this sense of reality? And so peyote is seen within this context as a doorway, right? So it is known because it has mescaline, right? That's the active component. So within the Western world, it's a drug, right? It's seen as a drug. In Mexico, if you walk around with peyote, you'll get stopped because you are like, not a drug dealer, but I guess technically you have kind. Now, if you're Wirrárica, you will not get put in jail. Like that has been one of their major achievements in the last maybe 20 years, is that they have gotten the state to recognize that they don't sell peyote. They don't give peyote to people who don't have earned that very specific right. And if you sell or buy peyote, it is like a very high sacrilegious crime. So they know that they're not going to deal with peyote. Like that is not going to be a substance that they have to worry about. So even though you have families of Wirrárica who will go to the desert and will come back to the mountains, to their communities with hundreds and hundreds of peyotes, those are just for the families in those communities, right? And so it has been recognized as part of their religion, right? And the reason is that if you and I walk to them and said, hey, dude, you got some peyote, they'll go like, not for you, right? It's like, no, that's not gonna work. But I'll pay for you. No, you won't get any, right? And this is where our sense of recreational drug, right, of having a good time, or just kind of tripping, is radically different from the indigenous perspective, because for them, it is actually about coming in contact with this spiritual reality, right? So if you don't believe in that spiritual world, it doesn't make sense, right? It'll be just like, well, I'll be kind of tripping and seeing whatever's in my own mind. Whereas for Wirrárica people, it actually makes them see their ancestors and their gods and the spiritual realm. So this is, and what is interesting is that all of these art pieces, which there's not really actually a word for art in Wirrárica, are depictions of those visions, right? That's why they have those very, very bright colors, right? And in this one, for example, that you see here, right, the center of the blue deer is a peyote, right? And in the mythology, the heart of the blue deer is one of their major gods, and the blue deer's heart is the peyote. So when they go to the desert, they never say, we go pick peyote, but you hunt for the blue deer, right? And you have to see the blue deer in order to find the peyote. Peyote is not just found randomly. And so one of the problems with these kind of peyote has become more popular is that you have people that are not part of this kind of worldview that go to the desert and don't know how to harvest peyote, don't know how to harvest it so that it grows back. So each peyote takes about 10 to 15 years to grow. It's a very, very slow growing cactus. That's why it's also very precious. So if you cut it in a way that you just kind of tear it out, it's never going to regrow. You just killed it. But if you cut it in a way that doesn't kill it, it'll multiply and regrow, right? So it's also about that relationship with the land and with the desert. So this is one of the yarn paintings I wanted to show you that illustrates some of these ideas, right? So you have kind of this major peyote at the center, which is irradiating this very powerful light. And so even the yarn paintings are called ñérica. And ñérica actually means to see. Like it's the actual object of the painting, but it also means to see what is real, right? So when people do this art, and a lot of Wirrárica people make these paintings, it's not just, oh, this is what kind of my individual, like I'm an artist and I do, but it's actually kind of these windows, these portals into this alternative reality, which is accessed through hikuri, through peyote, right? And in this one in particular, you see these figures around the peyote that are these men, kind of men, you know, with these feathers. And so here you really see that their relationship to the peyote is that of worship, right? And so this relationship to the peyote of worship is what would be missing completely from a Western perspective, right? So when I went to the Sierra, in the 90s, I was a teenager, and I mean, there were a lot of people that went there just to try to get some hands on peyote. And obviously, their approach was not reverential, was not like they just wanted to get some, right? And I often remember some of these kind of wise beings saying, I'm not going to give you any because you don't have the right attitude, right? For us, it's very, very sacred. And peyote gives you, like it gives you a sight. It tells you what you're supposed to do in your life. It teaches you. It's a teacher. We really venerate it. That's why you don't get addicted on peyote, because you don't have that attitude of a substance that is kind of making you forget your reality. It's the opposite. It's the substance that confronts you with ultimate reality. So imagine like there's a sense of awe and fear in that, right? Because it's so sacred. So this is, again, the map of Mexico. All of the pink area is where peyote grows, right? So it's an indigenous plant to the desert, not to the mountains. And so a lot of these tribes, there's a whole pilgrimage. It's a yearly pilgrimage to go to Viricuta, is the Wixárika name, and it's close to the village of Real de Catorce, right? So that's one of the other reasons why it's not really a drug, because you make such an effort, right? That's such a sacrifice to make this journey. It used to be made by foot. It used to take a month to get there and a month to come back, right? And it's perilous, right? And now you take it kind of by truck, right? But it's still an effort, right? To go. So it's an initiation, right? Wixárika people try to go there at least once in their life, and they start going there as children. So children will go there as young as 7 or 8 years old, and that's like how you get instructed in the mysteries of your culture, right? And that's how, with each trip, you learn more about who you are, what you're supposed to do in life, and families, parents bring their children, and they're always led by a central figure, which is the shaman, for lack of a better word, or the healer. And what is interesting is that when the Spanish arrived, the missionaries, and were like, hey, your gods are, like not good, they're not real, they're like, like they started to demonizing, the Wixárika were like, what are you talking about? I talk to my gods. Where's your God? Like it really countered evangelization in the sense that it was a very experiential form of religion. They said, no, they're real. I see them. I talk to them. I go to the desert. I eat peyote, and I have a spiritual experience, and you're telling me it's not real and it's not good? I don't buy it, right? So it's interesting how the Wixárika are one of the tribes in Mexico that has kept their culture and their faith very strong because it's so experiential, because it's such a part of it's such a part of a life way. And so the Maracame, or the shamans, they are the leaders, even today. They're the political and spiritual leaders of their communities, right? Which is really extraordinary because there hasn't been, like in Canada, like that residential schools or all these policies that acculturated indigenous peoples in the same way. So you still have a lot of these communities that are very strongly rooted in traditional ways, right? So the political leaders are still the spiritual leaders, and they're the healers, and they still are trained through peyote, right? So I wanted to show you this short clip so you get a little sense of the language and of the peoples, and then we'll take maybe some comments or questions.
Yo, Alejandro Severiano Carrillo de San Andrés Coamiata. Yo apoyo de mi familia, yo ayudo a mi familia, lo que está enfermando, yo lo ayudo. Soy cantador. Alguno tiene enfermedad de su estómago, de su pie o de su cerebro, de su corazón. Nosotros le limpiamos, le ayudamos. Ellos también lo que se nos ayudó, pues con mucho gusto se lo agradecemos.
Mi creencia es de la cultura, y mi papá, mi mamá, pues viene siendo en su cultura ahí. Cuando yo estaba ahí, pues practicaba, cuando hacía las ceremonias con el maracán, pues ahí frente del fuego y cantaba, yo le escuchaba. Nosotros tenemos una ceremonia, sembramos de 5 colores maíz, ahí sembramos, le cantamos y le pedimos suerte a la lluvia, pero ya en junto del maíz y la lluvia ya te va a decir del espíritu, qué es lo que te va a tocar el año, qué es lo que te va a tener la suerte, pues esa es la fe.
Hicimos el ceremonio nosotros, primero fiesta de toro, el segundo fiesta de tambor y tercero fiesta de peyote. Arrial de 14, allá comemos, allá dejamos la ofrenda en cada lugar de nuestro sangrado, sacamos agua bendita y con eso lo bendizamos a nuestra familia y los animales, chivos, borregos y vacas, caballos. Con esa agua lo bendizamos en cada lugar sangrado. Lo que estudiamos nuestro padre, nuestro abuelo, lo que aprendemos, pues mucho trabajo, como 5 o 6 años, hasta unos 10 años, y ya pueda empezar a cantar, a curarse, pero ya sabiendo bien. Nosotros aprendemos allá yendo a Real 14 y comemos peyote. El peyote como nos enseña y sale todo nuestro Dios, el fuego, en el sol, en el viento, en la lluvia, en la tierra, el agua. Me va a decir cómo voy a aprender a curar para ayudar a la familia.
Quisiéramos que no perdiera esas costumbres más que nada, porque es nuestro sagrado, nuestra vida. Y ahorita que que presentamos nuestra cultura, que siga funcionando, ¿verdad? Fortalecer más que nada.
So it gives you a little bit of a sense of maybe the language and the people. So they speak Spanish, most of them, but they speak Wirrárica, which is what the chants we're in, right? So, I mean, the greatest threat to this type of tradition today is the wage economy, right? So to be a full-time healer, you still need to get a job. I mean, unfortunately, like, they don't get paid for this. Healers are not paid. So like when I went to communities and I was like supposed to meet a healer, I was expecting, you know, like, I don't know, like an important person and I don't know, in a bigger house. Like I thought that their prestige would somehow reflect economically in their situation. I remember going around this village, going around in circles. I was like, where does this guy live? Where is this place? They all looked like all mud huts to me. And I stopped that there's a small shop, which was a tiendita, and I asked the guy, like, where is this person? He's like, it's me. He was the shop owner. I was like, oh, okay. You have a job, you have a family, yes. So, I mean, it's very time consuming to do these ceremonies. It's very time consuming to go to the desert. And so sometimes young people are like, the hell with that. That sounds really hard. Like, I'll just go to school and get a job and try to support my family. And unfortunately, you know, when they leave a lot of these communities because they need to get jobs and they come into the cities will be very racist environments, right? So where their culture and their knowledge, indigenous knowledge, will not be recognized. So urban Wirrárica will suffer from racism and will kind of stop sometimes teaching the language to their children so that their children kind of get more acclimated and, you know, kind of assimilated into the Mexican society and suffer less from racism. And they'll be, and some will go only to the pilgrimage only as adults, much, much later in life, and will be disconnected from this. So if the young people stop doing this, you know, well, then you have a few elders that will still know these traditions and this knowledge, but, you know, eventually fewer people will go to the desert. Meanwhile, in the desert, the peyote is getting picked clean by, hippies and all sorts of Western people that if you go online, right, and you go get peyote in the desert, I mean, I'm sure you're going to find a lot of entries for that and a lot of people willing to take you for a couple of $100 to pay for peyote, right? So it's a paradox, right? So that the traditions that are trying to keep, right, and protect these very ancient kind of knowledge and practices are dying out, right? Because it's not, it's not lucrative, and at the same time you have kind of, culturally appropriated all sorts of tours that offer you indigenous healing experiences in the desert and eating peyote for a lot of money, right? So this is kind of the paradox in some of these practices. And they will sell it in the name of getting you to experience something authentically indigenous, right? And they will use the peyote also as you're a Westerner, you're looking for meaning in indigenous spirituality, and you should come and try it out for yourself and trip out and have a taste of peyote in the desert. But actually, that's not how it works, right? If it's not just a substance that can be taken out of its context because it's so part of a worldview and of a culture, right? It's not the same if somebody from outside of that culture eats it. So I don't know if you have questions about peyote or comments about. I'm open. I think we have some time.
Thank you, Jimena. Anybody have any questions? I'll be right there.
Thank you. Hi, thank you for the presentation. Really interesting stuff. I just wanted to ask, do the Oaxacas have like a dedicated profession? Like, are they hunters, farmers? Do they have something that they all try to do, or have they moved to cities to have like city jobs?
That's a good question. So the people that are remaining in the communities in the mountains, sometimes they're farmers. So you'll be able to plant some corn and some beans just like as a survival. Like it's not a business. It's a survival. Like you feed your family with the corn and the beans that you plant. They're very poor. Like those communities don't have running water or electricity. So there's a lot of survival in the desert, and sometimes they also work as day workers in tobacco for tobacco companies, which is terrible because those are like full of pesticides, and so they get like cancer. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of these families have migrated to the cities, because they find that the options, if you stay in the mountains, in these communities, are very few, right, to actually feed your family. So a lot of them also sell some of the arts and crafts, right? So the paintings, their sculptures. Huirrárica art now is recognized in all of Mexico as being like kind of, so the beadings, the earrings, like they do a lot of arts and crafts. So a lot of them become full-time artists, kind of roaming artists. And then you have a new generation who are becoming professionals. Like I know Huirrárica who want to be like lawyers and doctors and teachers and go back to their communities and say, our communities need professionals. We need a lawyer. We need to fight against the lumber companies. We need teachers. We need nurses. So the younger generation wants to do the bridge. They know that if they become professionals and they go to university, they actually can help their communities. And sometimes they're the first generation to go beyond primary education, right? But they have kind of a vision for that. So it's changing. Like that panorama is changing. Yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, have you ever taken peyote?
I was waiting for that one, right? So first of all, because it's a very personal experience, I would not answer, but I'm gonna kind of answer saying yes. But what I would like to say is that, like, what I was very fortunate was to receive it as a gift, right? I did not get to go to the pilgrimage. I have not done that. That has not been kind of part of what I've done. But within the families that I have stayed, I have received it as a gift, and that's all I'm gonna say. And I'm gonna say that it tastes very, very, very bitter, right? That's about it. But I mean, and this is how you're supposed to receive it, as a gift.
Question.
Okay.
When I think about getting to a deeper reality, I think about that helps orient us to how we're going to live our lives and make better decisions that will help us. And I wonder if you can share with us any examples from your time with the Wirharika people,
yeah.
that after their experiences in the ritual of peyote, that they came back with some new ideas that help improve their lives.
Well, I mean, that's what an initiation is, right? There's a before and an after, right? And even the whole ritual of the initiation actually makes, like, there's a big show of that, right? So when people go from the mountain to the desert, there's like a confession to the fire. They have to shed all their old clothes, get new clothes. Like, there's a real sense of rebirth. So people are supposed to come back to their lives with new insight. And the difference between, so the regular, ordinary person that goes and eats peyote, right? So I'll give you a sense. So the shaman in a pilgrimage decides how much a person can take. That's also why you need a specialist, because you're not supposed to auto-give yourself peyote. Like, that would be very dangerous, right? So the shaman will say, okay, this person can have 5, 10, 15, 25 peyotes. Like, that's because it's several nights in the desert. And so the idea is that you eat so much that you're completely immersed in that kind of alternate reality. But the shaman himself never loses kind of a sense of where he is, right? It's like somebody like the one that keeps the flock close, right? He never loses completely himself in that experience. So people are supposed to gradually come back into their senses, and that's where they start to talk about their vision. And he helps them kind of explain that. Oh, I saw these images, or I saw these. That's why also the role of art is really important, right? So this is somebody's vision, right? This is what somebody saw and the messages they received for their life, right? And that's like that part of deciphering the messages that they receive. Those are the things that are going to inform their lives, and maybe like what is their mission in life. Like it's those visions are very personal, but the shaman's role is also to help that person like interpret those visions and those dreams, right? And then a lot of them kind of get to paint them and express them through what we would call art. But yeah, and if you go more than one time, so for a shaman to become a shaman, he has to go 12 years in a row to the desert. The 6 years are as an apprentice, and the 6 following years are kind of as a leader. And that's why he said it takes a long time to actually become a specialist, when an individual is just supposed to go at least once.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I have a number of questions. I'm going to settle on one, I think, might lead into others. So as you were speaking, I was, reflecting on the way in which questions about reality are asked and addressed and theorized about in, I guess, what we might call the Western tradition. And I guess in that tradition, this reality, one way in which one thinks about reality is what is ultimately or fundamentally there, as opposed to what is immediately observable.
Yeah.
And you raised those questions at the very beginning when you were talking about the senses and about causation. So, okay, now my question is, when you are in a peyote state of mind, is there a kind of awareness that you are accessing what we would call in our inquiries into these things something like an ultimate reality, a causational, a state where, like, a fundamental causation from which everything else. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's focus points, right? So part of the rituals are always around bonfires, right? Bonfires. And the fire itself is a god, Tatewari. It's the most ancient god, right? So when you read some of the accounts, right? Because the anthropologists have had a good time in asking people, so what happened in the first, half hour? Well, then what happened the 6 hours? And then what happened after 12 hours? So there's a sequence that a lot of people say, they start to see the very bright colors, geometric shapes, and then keeping the focus point, for example, on the fire, they start to hearing it talk to them, right? And then some say it said just one word, and some have long conversations. And they're aware that, okay, this is not just me tripping out with the fire talking to me. I've gotten to that level where the fire, which is always this very powerful God, I have been able to now communicate because I'm in the right state of mind, right? And this is where some people will receive one word, and some people will receive a chant. Like there's some anthropologists who have asked, what did you receive? I received the chant, right? This is what he gave me. I have to sing this song now. And then they know when they come out of that state, they remember the chant, and that kind of stays as their connection to that. It's really interesting. And again, you have to think of Wirarika people having, literally, while breastfeeding from their mothers, there was already peyote in that milk, right? This is how part of the culture it is, because it's not just eating once a year. Every celebration has some peyote throughout the year, right? And so it's really something that is very, very present. And all these stories have also been told to children. So when they come into that state, there's a sense of, okay, we're there. This is it. What is the message I'm going to receive?
Oh, wait.
Yeah, hi. I would like to know, what is their definition of God and what each one represent to them? Like, for example, peyote, fire, and every God you mentioned.
It's not like in monotheistic, an ultimate God. There's much more of a sense of ancestors, right? So if there's an original creation, then you would have what are the most, if everything at first was dark, what are the first things that came to life, right? So there's fire, sun, water, moon, all of these natural elements are deified, right? So there is no other separate God that created creation. Creation is divine, right? So the water, the sources, the fire, the mountains, all of that. So the creation stories have all those elements. That's why they're constantly also worshiping the land, right? As he was saying, when you go to a water source, you give thanks because that is actually a manifestation of those gods. And they have, I can tell you the name of a couple of them, right? So Tatewari is the fire, Tatao is the sun, right? You'll have feminine deities and masculine deities. The deer, that's Maxaquauqui, right? That's the blue deer, that's also a central god. And different indigenous peoples also are very close to their land and their environment, right? So if you go to the West Coast, the salmon and the killer whale will be really important animals. For the Wirarika, those were the desert and the mountain animals, so the deer, right? That's very specific to their context. And so there's an order, and it's a very kind of long story, right, that gets chanted, what happened in the time of creation. And what is interesting is that these chants are not just retold as, oh, this happened long ago. When people go back to the desert, it's like you replay that. You reenact, you relive the moment of creation where they come out of. So in the desert, in Wirikuta, that's where the sun is supposed to have been born. There's an actual place, which is called the Cerro Quemado. There's a shrine. It's like the sun was born here, right? So people go there and make offerings. So it's all very land-based, right? So that's why they fight mining companies that want to, that want to destroy the desert, because for them this is sacred. It's not just, oh, there's gold or minerals. It's literally the body of their deities, these places.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Yes, right here. Perfect.
Sorry, one more question. This will be the last, I promise. Just in the communities that they live in, not the ones that move to the cities, how's the condition? because I want to compare.
Terrible.
Oh,
It's terrible. It's terrible. It's dire poverty, extreme poverty. Is extreme poverty. It's. I mean, the difference, I think that, you know, in Canada, we do recognize that when we look at Indigenous communities, so Canada is, you know, like top 10 country, and we know that Indigenous communities are living in third world conditions, right? A lot of them don't have, you know, kind of clean water. There's very high levels of unemployment, and, you know, like these are, but in Mexico, that's like even another extreme, right? So in a lot of these communities, there's no water, no electricity. And they're living in mud huts. But at this, I mean, in a certain way, that isolation has also made it that there is no state presence, right? There's no police. There's nobody to tell you you should be doing this and that. That's why kind of traditional authorities have been able to be maintained. But it comes with a price of extreme poverty, right? So when you get to a place that has kind of an ayuntamiento and a, you know, city hall, and there's roads and electricity, and there's like a state presence, then there's more kind of acculturation. Unfortunately, I mean, this is the struggle. Can we get services and still kind of maintain our cultural identity? But, you know, I think Mexico, as a lot of these colonial states, still thinks everybody should speak Spanish and, you know, go to school and learn national history, and to a certain degree, this is still, I mean, Mexico now has recognized that it's a multicultural nation, indigenous-wise, not because there's people from all over the world, but because it's multicultural because of the great variety of indigenous people. But indigenous people are definitely the poorest and the most marginalized and the most, you know, still kind of segregated and really dispossessed people in Mexico. So these communities are very poor. That's why it's very admirable when the new generation says, you know, I want to be a doctor and I want to be a nurse, and because my community needs that. I need to go back and help that community prosper. I can't just go back to the city and work for the government.
Thank you. I have a question, another one. I was wondering, you talked about there's a certain schedule to the peyote ritual, and I wondered what that schedule is linked to, if it's harvest rituals or something else.
Well, the whole year has a schedule in the sense that, you know, like he was saying, there's the ceremony of the drum, there's a ceremony of the bull, like there's a very tight ritual schedule. And then there's the peyote, like it's a lunar calendar. So it is linked to the seasons, but it's also linked to the moon. And this is also because a lot of, like in Mesoamerican calendars, that was also how you counted, right? It's called the veintenas, right? So all of these are always kind of very connected to yes, kind of natural seasons and natural shifts and the moon. Yeah.
Hi, my question is, you said we see reality through perspectives, right? And then you said when we take peyote, is that how we pronounce it?
Yeah.
Yeah, when we take peyote, we feel, we see, but isn't that the same thing as perspectives? You said we go beyond those perspectives, but you said, after that, you said we see, we feel everything, but isn't that the same thing as a perspective?
Well, that's a good question, because we have to go back to this one, right? So the understanding is that your mind enters an altered state of consciousness. So it leaves ordinary so the ordinary consciousness is, now it's 2 p.m., you have a class, you got lunch, got things to do. Like there's a sense of time and space. But the understanding is that peyote allows your mind to break free from that ordinary perspective. And so what it experiences is not really through the senses, it's through the mind. But it's still the mind that processes all the information of the senses, right? So if you're sitting in front of like a fire, right? The fire is still there. You're still sitting, right? Your eyes are open. But because you've eaten peyote, the sense of that experience is changed. So it goes from an ordinary sense of this is a fire, I'm here, it's there, it's hot, if I go in and I'm gonna get burned, like, to a sense of this is a being who's talking to me and I can understand what he's saying, right? Yeah.
Let's say you were deaf or blind.
I'm sure they have other experiences. I don't know specifically about deaf or blind. It relies on the five senses, but is on, like, the key word here is altered, right? Like if you're drunk, right? That's another substance. Well, let's not talk about peyote. You still have the senses, right? Why do you fall and you lose balance, right? Why do you start to act in a different way? You're still in your body. You're still acting through your body, but it's affected, right? It's influenced by the substance. So peyote will influence those sense perceptions, so the sight, the smell, differently, right? And that's why in the West we call them hallucinogens. Like it makes you see something that doesn't exist. But for the Wixárika, tells you it actually makes you see something that was always there, but that you couldn't see without the peyote. You see what I mean? It's still the senses, but it's something that allows you to see beyond. It's like a veil that is supposed to lift. And that's why people are very eager to try it. But again, I would not recommend it without, kind of proper accompaniment, because it's very powerful. And maybe this is the last comment that I would like to leave you with. So one of the trips that I did in the Sierra, there was a young man who was very, very eager. And every day he would go to the shaman and say, I want peyote, I want peyote. He's like, no, you're not ready. No, you're not ready. But he was bugging him every day, every day, every day. And he's like, you don't have the right attitude. It's like, this is serious. This is powerful stuff. And so the last day, he's like, okay, you want to try it? You're not listening. I've been telling you. He's like, yes, yes. He would not listen. He's like, okay, I'll give you some. So you know what happened to this kid? He ate the peyote, not having the right attitude. So what happened to him is that he started hallucinating that his hand was a tarantula, and he tried to chop it off, right? And so he hurt himself. So when he came down from that trip, he's like, hey, peyote is supposed to... And the shaman told him, he's like, I told you, you did not respect peyote, so peyote showed you your fear. You did not see the light or the sun, or you didn't have that reverence and that respect. You just wanted to take something out of it. And so you had a very bad trip. I hope this taught you a lesson, right? And so he needed to have that experience because he didn't listen.
Thank you, Jimena. Are there any further questions? If not, I want to thank you for altering our idea of reality and expanding our consciousness, Dr. Jimena Marquez. And thank you to all of you for participating, and I hope to see you again during the week.